I honestly don't know how to feel about what happened anymore, and I need you guys to tell me if I was the one who overstepped or if I actually saved a life that day. Imagine walking into your own home and seeing a complete stranger sitting at your kitchen table with your rebellious, angry teenage son. And for the first time in 3 years, that kid isn't screaming or slamming doors. He's actually crying. My son Leo had become a stranger to me, a whirlwind of rage and bad influences that I couldn't control no matter how hard I tried. But this man, a guy named Adam whom I'd never met, managed to do in 2 hours what I couldn't do in a decade. Was I wrong to let a total stranger into the deepest, darkest corners of our family's trauma? Or did I finally find the only way to keep my son from destroying his entire future? Please, tell me if you would have trusted your gut like I did. Or if you would have called the police the second you saw an intruder influencing your child. To understand how we got to that point, you have to understand the nightmare our lives had become over the last few years. Leo used to be the kind of kid who would bring home stray kittens and spend his weekends building birdhouses with me in the garage, but everything changed after his father left us. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a total abandonment that left a hole in Leo's heart that he chose to fill with fire and rebellion. By the time he hit 16, he was failing every class, hanging out with a crowd that looked for trouble in every alleyway, and treating me like I was the enemy. Every single night was a battle of wills, with him coming home late, smelling like smoke, and looking at me with eyes so full of resentment it felt like a physical blow to my chest. I had tried therapy, but he would sit there in silence, staring at the clock until the 50 minutes were up. I had tried tough love by taking away his phone and his bike, but he would just jump out of the window at night and stay gone for days. I had tried being his friend, offering to take him to movies or concerts, but he would just sneer and tell me that I was pathetic for trying so hard. I was drowning in my own house, and I could see him sinking right alongside me, drifting further and further away into a life of crime and bitterness that I knew would eventually end in a prison cell or a hospital bed. I remember one specific night, just a week before Adam showed up, where Leo didn't come home until 3 a.m. I was sitting in the dark living room, heart hammering against my ribs, imagining the worst-case scenarios. Him being arrested, him being hurt, or him hurting someone else. When he finally walked through the door, he didn't look guilty, he looked bored. When I tried to ask him where he'd been, he just laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and told me that I was the reason his life was a mess. He said that if I had been a better wife, maybe his dad would have stayed and he wouldn't feel so alone. That comment broke something deep inside me. It wasn't just teenage rebellion anymore. It was deep-seated psychological warfare. I spent that whole night crying on the kitchen floor, wondering if I should just give up. The house felt like a war zone where the borders were constantly shifting, and I was losing ground every single day. I had started locking my bedroom door at night, not because I was afraid he'd hurt me, but because I couldn't bear the thought of him sneaking back out and me being powerless to stop it. The weight of being a single mother to a child who actively despises you is a burden I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Every morning I'd wake up with a pit in my stomach, wondering if today was the day I'd get the phone call that would change everything forever. I had even contacted a boot camp for troubled youth, but the cost was astronomical, and the thought of sending my son away felt like admitting total defeat. I felt like a failure as a mother, as a protector, and as a person. Every memory of him as a sweet child felt like a cruel joke compared to the monster he was becoming. I would look at old photos of us at the beach and wonder where that boy went, and if he was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of scar tissue and misplaced anger. I even started dreading the sound of his footsteps because I knew they preceded another screaming match or another demand for money I didn't have. My friends told me to kick him out, to let him see how hard the world really is, but how do you throw your own heart out into the street? I was trapped in a cycle of enabling and agony. The day everything changed started out like any other miserable Tuesday, with me finding a hidden stash of things in his room that no parent ever wants to see. Pills I didn't recognize, drug paraphernalia, and cash that he definitely hadn't earned from a part-time job. When I confronted him, the explosion was immediate. He screamed that he hated me, that he wished he'd never been born, and that he was going to leave and never come back. He stormed out, nearly taking the front door off its hinges, leaving me trembling in the hallway. I spent the afternoon at work in a daze, barely able to focus on my tasks because my mind was looping through every mistake I'd ever made, wondering if I should call the police on my own son just to save him from himself. I felt like I was watching him slow motion walk off a cliff, and I was too weak to pull him back. I had spent hours searching the internet for how to handle an out-of-control teen. But every piece of advice felt hollow and useless in the face of the raw, jagged anger Leo carried. I was convinced that by the time I got home, he would have either cleared out the house or be in the back of a squad car. When I finally pulled into the driveway that evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, I saw a black SUV I didn't recognize parked out front. My heart plummeted because I immediately assumed it was the police or a social worker coming to tell me Leo had finally crossed a line he couldn't come back from. I ran inside, my keys shaking in my hand, prepared for the absolute worst: handcuffs, blood, or a warrant. But what I found was something I could never have predicted in a million years. There was a man sitting there. He looked athletic, charismatic, and had this intense but kind energy about him. And he was just talking to Leo. This was Adam, a guy who apparently worked with at-risk youth, and had seen Leo getting into a heated, dangerous confrontation at a local park earlier that day. Adam had been filming a video nearby when he saw Leo and 3 other guys about to pull out weapons over something as stupid as a perceived insult or a territorial dispute. Instead of calling the cops and letting these kids get caught in the system, which would have ruined their lives forever, Adam had stepped right into the middle of the circle. He didn't use a gun or a badge. He used his presence and his voice to de-escalate a fight that was seconds away from turning into a tragedy. He told Leo later that he saw something in his eyes, not malice, but a desperate need to be seen and respected. He somehow convinced Leo to let him drive him home. And even more shockingly, my son, who trusted no one, actually agreed to let this stranger into our house. For the next hour I stood in the hallway, hidden by the shadows of the dining room, listening to this stranger dismantle every defense my son had built up over the years. Adam didn't talk down to him. He didn't lecture him about his grades, his chores, or the laws he was breaking. He talked to him about the code of being a man, about how true power isn't about intimidation or how many people are afraid of you, but about self-control and the ability to protect those you love. He shared stories of his own past, of how he used to think that being loud and aggressive was the only way to get respect until he realized that the strongest men in the room are usually the ones who don't have to say a word to be heard. Adam spoke about his own mentors, the people who pulled him back from the edge when he was just as lost as Leo. He talked about the psychology of anger, how it's usually just a mask for fear. He looked Leo in the eyes and said, "You aren't a warrior for fighting your mom, Leo. You're a coward for making the woman who loves you most suffer for things she didn't even do." I watched through the crack in the door as Leo's tough guy persona, the slouch, the permanent scowl, the crossed arms, slowly began to dissolve. It was like watching a block of ice melt under a relentless sun. Adam asked him about his dad, and instead of Leo snapping "none of your business," like he did with me every single time I tried to bring it up, he actually started talking. He talked about the day his dad packed his bags, the sound of the car pulling away, and the hollow promise his dad made to take him fishing that never happened. He talked about the crushing weight of feeling like he wasn't good enough for his own father to stay and be a parent. Hearing my son articulate his pain so clearly made my heart shatter into a million pieces. I realized then that Leo wasn't trying to be a criminal or a bad kid. He was just a grieving, broken child who had been left behind, and was trying to punish the world for his father's sins. Adam stayed calm, nodding, looking him right in the eye, and told him that while his father's departure wasn't his fault, what he did with that pain was entirely his responsibility. He told him that he had 2 choices. He could spend the rest of his life being a victim of his father's absence, or he could become the man his father failed to be. He told him that every time he yelled at me or did drugs, he was letting his dad win all over again. He was letting the trauma dictate his identity. This hit Leo like a physical blow. I could see his shoulders shaking. I could hear the hitch in his breath. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for a way out of the hole he had dug for himself. So that is the absolute chaos I walked into, and I was standing there paralyzed between gratitude and pure terror. I had a man I didn't know in my house, effectively parenting my child better than I could. and I had to decide right then and there whether to kick him out or let this miracle continue. Before I tell you the rest of what happened, and the incredible way our lives shifted after that night, I want you to pause right now and hit the comments. If you were a parent in my shoes, would you have trusted this stranger who seemed to be the only person able to reach your son? Or would you have been too afraid of his motives to let him stay? Seriously, let me know what you would have done, because I'm still processing if I made the right call, or if I was just being desperate. After I finally made my presence known, stepping out of the shadows with tears still drying on my face, Adam stood up and introduced himself with such genuine humility that my fears started to melt away almost instantly. He didn't act like a hero, he acted like a brother. He explained that he'd seen Leo at a crossroads today, one path leading to a life of regret, prison, and pain, and the other leading to a chance at something better. And he just couldn't walk away and let another young man fall through the cracks. We ended up sitting there for hours, the three of us, having the first honest conversation our family had seen in 3 long, agonizing years. Adam challenged Leo to look at me, really look at me, and see the exhaustion, the gray hairs, and the desperate love in my eyes. He told Leo that while he couldn't control what his father did, he could control how he treated the woman who had stayed and fought for him every single day. Adam didn't just leave after that night either. He became a constant mentor, a lighthouse in the storm. He would check in on Leo via text, take him to the gym to channel that aggression into physical fitness, and give him books and videos that focused on mindset, discipline, and emotional intelligence. He showed Leo that there was a whole world outside of our small town's drama, and the toxic friends he had surrounded himself with. Over the next few weeks, I watched a transformation that I can only describe as a miracle. It wasn't just that Leo stopped getting into trouble. It was like his whole soul was being reconstructed. He started waking up early, going for runs to clear his head instead of reaching for a cigarette. He started sitting in the kitchen while I cooked dinner, not to argue, but just to be there. One afternoon, I came home to find him cleaning the garage, the same garage where he and his father used to build those birdhouses. He had found the old tools, wiped off the dust, and was organizing them. He didn't say anything, but the silence was finally peaceful. He began to distance himself from his old crew. I remember one night they pulled up in their beat-up car, honking the horn and calling for him to come out. Leo stood at the window for a long time just watching them. I held my breath, thinking this was the moment he'd slip back. But instead he just closed the blinds and sat down on the sofa. "I'm done with that, Mom," he said quietly. "They don't want me to be happy. They just want me to be as miserable as they are." That was the moment I knew Adam's words had truly taken root. The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were still arguments, there were still moments of doubt, and there were still times when Leo wanted to slide back into his old habits. But the spark Adam lit that evening stayed bright. There were still bad days, of course, but the bad days were no longer about police interventions or drug stashes. They were just about Leo being a moody teenager again, which felt like a luxury compared to the nightmare we'd been through. He even started helping out around the house without being asked. I'd come home from a double shift to find the dishes done, or the laundry folded. These small gestures felt like massive victories. One day his principal called me, and my heart skipped a beat, thinking something had gone wrong. But instead, the principal was confused. He told me that Leo had volunteered to help a younger student who was being bullied. He said he'd never seen a turnaround like this in his 20 years of education. The climax of this journey came a few months later when Leo actually apologized. Not a forced apology for a specific rule he broke or a chore he missed, but a deep, tearful, soul-bearing apology for the years of pain he'd put me through. We were sitting on the back porch one evening, watching the sunset, and out of nowhere he just said, "Mom, I'm sorry I tried to make you feel as bad as I felt. I was hurting, and I took it out on the only person who stayed." We both cried for an hour, a release of 3 years of pent-up trauma and grief. He told me that Adam had made him realize that being a man meant taking responsibility for his own happiness instead of blaming everyone else for his sadness. He finally understood that by destroying himself, he was only finishing the job his father had started, and he didn't want to give his father that kind of power over his life anymore. He chose to be better because he finally felt like he deserved to be better. He realized that the greatest revenge against an absent father isn't to fail, but to thrive and become everything that man was afraid to be. Today, our home is a completely different place, full of peace instead of tension. Leo is graduating soon, and he's actually looking at trade schools, something he never thought he was smart enough or disciplined enough to do because his teachers had written him off as a lost cause. He wants to be an electrician, to build things, to fix things that are broken. A beautiful irony considering how broken he once was and how he's now dedicated to bringing light into dark places. He's even started talking about how he wants to work with kids like himself one day. To be that Adam, for someone else who feels like the world has given up on them. My relationship with my son has been restored in a way that I honestly thought was impossible. And I owe so much of that to a stranger named Adam who decided to care when he didn't have to. It taught me that sometimes the people who are closest to the problem, family, teachers, counselors, can't get through because there's too much history, too much baggage, and too many triggers there. Sometimes it takes an outside force, a stranger with a different perspective and a different energy, to break the cycle and speak a language the child is willing to hear. I look back on that Tuesday and I realize that if I had followed my first instinct to scream, call the police, and kick Adam out, I might have lost my son forever. I might be visiting him in a jail cell right now instead of helping him fill out college applications. It was a lesson in trust, in humility, and in the power of one person taking a moment to intervene in someone else's downward spiral. Sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need in the most unexpected package, and you have to be brave enough to open it. I still talk to Adam occasionally, just to thank him for being the bridge we needed when we were standing on opposite sides of a canyon. He told me that seeing Leo succeed is all the payment he ever wanted. This experience changed my entire outlook on how we treat troubled kids in our society. Most of the time they aren't bad kids. They are just hurting kids who have forgotten how to speak any language other than anger because they feel like no one is listening to their pain. They are looking for a way out, but they don't have the map, and they are too proud to ask for directions from the people who love them. Adam was that map for Leo. He showed him that you can be strong without being cruel, and you can be successful without stepping on others. He showed him that being a man is about how you treat people when you don't have to be nice. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's that sometimes a little bit of unexpected kindness and a lot of raw honesty can save a life. Don't be so quick to judge the kid in the hoodie with the angry eyes. You don't know the war they are fighting inside or the absence they are trying to fill. Sometimes all they need is one person to look past the mask and see the human being underneath. Life is messy, and family is harder than anyone tells you, but as long as there's breath in your lungs and a willingness to change, there's always hope. Like this video if you think I made the right choice by letting Adam help us, and trusting a stranger when I was at my lowest point. Please subscribe to the channel for more daily stories that dive deep into the emotional and shocking realities of life. I'd love to hear your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments. Have you ever had a stranger change your life for the better? Or have you ever been the one to intervene and help someone who was lost? Your stories might help someone else realize they aren't alone in their struggle. Every comment helps this story reach more parents who might be losing hope with their own kids. Thank you so much for listening to my story and supporting the journey we've been on together. It hasn't been easy, but it has been worth every second to see my son smile again, and to know that he has a future worth fighting for. I'll see you all in the next story, where we'll explore another incredible life-changing moment. Stay strong, stay kind, and never stop looking for the light in the darkness.